Welcome to A Guide to Every Deck in EDH, and today we're looking at Archelos Lagoon Mystic. So Archelos is a 4-mana Sultai commander. He's got 2 abilities. As long as he's tapped, other permanents enter tapped, and as long as he's untapped, other permanents enter untapped. So do note both of these abilities are symmetrical. So if he's untapped, your opponent's permanents also enter untapped, and if he's tapped, your opponent's permanents enter tapped, but so do yours. So the main things that this guy is going to be doing is he's basically a Sultai stacks commander. And we're going to use his ability to either become tapped to make sure that our opponent's permanents come in tapped, or untap him to make sure our permanents are entering untapped. So we've got our fairly straightforward card draw spells, pretty stock stuff. Narset also has a stacks piece. We've got our combo cards. We've obviously got Consul Oracle, Hullbreaker Horror, and then Opposition, which is used to tap an untapped creature to tap a artifact, creature, or land. The land part is in particular relevant because we can tap our creatures to tap our opponent's lands before they can use them. And anything that taps Archelos can tap him to make him now tapped and therefore make our opponent's stuff enter tapped. Various counter spells, a little bit of fast mana here, but we don't really care so much about that. Fairly straightforward Sultai lands for the Sultai mana base. Some protection to make sure that we're not countered or killed. So Allosaurus Shepherd, Destiny Spinner, Veil of Summer, Sylvan Safekeeper, and Xantid Swarm. We've got some ramp, including Citadel Stalwart, which can tap an untapped artifact or creature. So yeah, that includes Archelos to make sure that our opponent's stuff is entering tapped. Citadel Stalwart is not the only creature that's 1 mana that taps something, but we don't want to play like too many of those because he's not really that efficient of a mana dork anyway. And you'll also notice here that we don't have the typical mana dorks that you might expect. So there's no Elves of Deep Shadow or like other 1 mana dorks here other than Birds, Deathrite, and Delighted Halfling. There'll be reasons for that coming up. Bitter Removal, Manglehorn, Rex Sage. And then here is all of our various stacks cards. So we've got Arcane Lab as our blue rule of law. We've got Anti-Draw in Chains of Mephistopheles, Narset, Notion Thief, and Orcish Bowmasters. Anti-artifact activated abilities, so Collector Oof and Null Rod. And you'll notice up here, we do have some artifacts for ramp, which are all the best ones, the Moxen, Monocrypt, Soul Ring, but the other stuff is not artifact based. And then Opposition Agent, and then we've got all of the tap stuff. So in particular, there's Winter Orb and Static Orb to prevent our opponents from having things enter, or to have things untap during their untap step. And Stasis, things straight up do not untap, but you have to pay blue in order to keep it around. And then there's Root Maze and Orb of Dreams. Root Maze is all artifacts and lands enter tapped, including yours. And Orb of Dreams, all permanents enter tapped, again, including yours. So the main deal here, and then you've got Frozen Aether, artifacts, creatures, and lands and under your opponent's control enter tapped, and Tangle Wire, which is at the beginning of each player's upkeep, the player taps an untapped artifact, creature, or land for each fade counter on Tangle Wire, and you lose a fade counter on every upkeep. So the main deal here is to try to get some of these forced tap or no untap related stacks cards into play, and then use Archelos to break the synergy on them. So, or the symmetry on them. So Archelos, again, remember, it is if he's tapped, everything enters tapped. If he's untapped, everything enters untapped. So if you have these cards that say untapped, or that say enter tapped, for example, like Orb of Dreams and Root Maze, everything's entering tapped, right? If you've got Archelos untapped, that means that you can apply the replacement effects in any way that you want, meaning you can have your stuff enter untapped, and then as long as you have a way, and so yeah, you have your stuff enter untapped anyway, even though these are in play. You just have a way to have Archelos tap again, right? So whether that be an effect that straight up taps him, again, like Sentinel Stalwart, or you just attack somebody and then Archelos is tapped, then your opponents have their stuff enter tapped again. So the main deal is, again, use Archelos or Orb of Dreams or Root Maze or Frozen Aether, and to a lesser extent Tangle Wire, and combine them with Stasis, Static Orb, and or Winter Orb to make sure that our opponents have their stuff entering tapped and not untapping. Now, the big problem with Stasis, of course, is that you have to pay blue to keep it around, and if it's in play, that means your stuff isn't untapping anyway, meaning that unless you're playing another blue land every single turn, you're eventually not going to be able to pay for this. So you can either use it as a way to temporarily just slow everything down, or you have to find a way to break it. So this means you'll need a way of either flickering or bouncing a mana source in a way that doesn't require you to pay any mana for it, or you'll have to find a way to get Stasis back into your hand, or again, flicker Stasis or something so where this effect isn't applicable when you're going to untap. Of course, there's a little bit of sweep action in Psych Rift, and you've got your tutors. And then here's the way that you actually break parity. So this way you can break Stasis, you can break Root Maze, you can break Orb of Dreams, Seedborn Muse, and Wilderness Wreck. So Seedborn Muse untaps everything during your opponent's untap steps, and Wilderness Reclamation untaps all of your lands on end steps. So if you get the combo of Stasis plus Root Maze or Orb of Dreams, or you have Archelos tapped, what that means, or I guess Frozen Aether as well also counts. What that means is that your opponent's permanents all enter the battlefield tapped, including their lands, so they never have access to any mana. And then you untap your lands and other things with Seedborn Muse or Wilderness Reclamation, so you can always keep paying for Stasis, whereas your opponents can never pay for Stasis because their stuff is entering tapped anyway. So that's the combo. It's Stasis, and then you need either Archelos or Root Maze or Frozen Aether or Orb of Dreams, and then you need either Seedborn or Wilderness Wreck. All of your opponent's stuff enters tapped. Your stuff also enters tapped, but untapped as well. And this can also work with things like Winter Orb and Static Orb. So obviously Seedborn and Wilderness Reclamation make it so that you're untapping all of your lands, whereas your opponents are only untapping 1 or 2. And that is the main way that you're going to beat your opponents with the Archelos deck. So it's either that, or you just combo off again with like Hullbreaker, Demonic, Thoracle. But the Stacks plan also contributes towards this plan because it means you can slow down the game until you find one of these. And Hullbreaker Horror is also another way that you can combine with certain things. So for example, if you've got like Stasis, but you don't have the untappers, you can end step on your opponent's turn, cast anything that's an instant, bounce the Stasis back to your hand, untap everything as normal, and then replay Stasis. And yeah, that is going to be Archelos Stacks.